Today, we're taking a look at all the preseason news from the Western Conference, including the recent injury news regarding Steven Adams. Joining me, as always, will be Zach Hanchu. This is Fantasy Basketball International. This is Balls Deep. Got all my interest, mirrors they don't, all of the things that we do. Welcome to the Balls Deep Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Fantasy Basketball International at Adam King 91 on Twitter is where you can find me. FBIbasketball.com is our website. Head over. Still some leagues, I think, that we're opening up and a few drafts running over the next couple of days. But obviously, we're only, 48 hours-ish from the start of the NBA season at the time of recording. I'll bring in Zach. Zach, thanks for joining me. The next couple of weeks are going to be a little bit tricky with matching up times and that sort of thing, but we managed to squeeze this one in. Now, I'm going to bring up known Wemby simp. Can you explain that to anyone who might not know what that means?
Yeah, so simp is slang for somebody that is an unusually dedicated fan of somebody. We'll put it that way. So after Wemby's preseason play, I'm falling hard for him, man. He is, and if you know me, I go really high on rookies usually, much to the detriment of my fantasy teams usually. But man, this guy looks like the real deal. I've moved him. I have him top 20 in points and 8 category leagues right now. So, just putting some final tweaks on the rankings. And man, this guy looks like the real deal. He can pass, he can shoot, he can block shots, he can rebound. I don't know what he can't do at this point.
Yeah, look, watching the preseason's obviously been impressive. It is only preseason. Yes, we're all aware that it's not real basketball, but that game against the Warriors the other night, some of the blocks that he gets, he just shouldn't be getting. Players are going to have to adjust, and we saw vision of the who was it? There was a team that was practicing, and they had one of their coaches with this holding a massive thing up to sort of replicate this is what where his arm is going to be when you're taking a shot, and they're just going to have to. It's going to be interesting to watch. You'll be happy to know that I did a draft yesterday, and based on the build, this was a good choice. Ended up being a good choice. I took Wembanyama at pick 14, so I was drafting for a friend, and I really just wanted him on the team. I had pick 11, and I went with Anthony Davis and Victor Wembanyama as my first 2 picks, and then backed that up with Chet Holmgren with my next pick. It was an interesting, fun build that I'd never done before, but I was pretty happy with how it turned out. So, and I said to my mate, I said, "Are you happy for me to reach for Wemby?" And he said, "Just do what you need to do." And I said to him after, "Look, I can't promise you're going to win this league, but it's going to be fun trying." So he's got a lot of entertaining players on his team. As I said, we'll talk about, much like we did last week, we'll go through the divisions in the Western Conference and chat about some player news and preseason takeaways. But I just thought we'd quickly touch on news that came out overnight regarding Steven Adams. He's out for the season, undergoing knee surgery on that the injury from last season. So I guess this is something that they tried to get right without surgery, and it just didn't work. And he's a big body, like he's got a lot of weight and size to carry around the court there. So they've decided to go that path of surgery. I'm thinking this is partly lining up with the fact that Ja Morant is going to be out for such a big part of the season. Maybe they're not going to go as hard this year. I mean, they'll still try to win, I think, but they want to I guess, get a full season of Ja Morant. Bane will be better again. So in terms of fantasy, we're obviously not drafting Steven Adams now, and if you did draft him, you can drop him. Is there a clear pickup here? Xavier Tillman and Santi Aldama are probably the two that come to mind. And Zaire Williams possibly gets a bump as well. He was looking at being a starter. Any moves you're making here that are significant enough?
Yeah, I like Tillman outside the top 100, probably with the last pick in your draft in a 12-team league. I think Aldama, maybe Kenny Lofton, maybe David Roddy are going to be good for deeper leagues. But Tillman in 12-team leagues, absolutely. Zaire Williams, I don't know. We've seen him even when he gets starter level minutes. His game is better in the NBA than it is for fantasy. Not necessarily a guy that I'm thrilled to pick up. I won't be adding him anywhere. But Tillman in a categories league, towards the end of your draft, in a points league, I think I have him just inside the top 125. So, somewhere in that 10, 11 round range sounds about appropriate for him.
And I think not that this affects fantasy or changes fantasy at all, but Jaren Jackson could play a little more at the center. And so maybe his rebound numbers go up slightly. He has been a bit of an underwhelming contributor in that category as a big in the past. So maybe he can bump those numbers up a little bit. The other news that I was just scrolling through player news, and obviously we wake up to a lot of this stuff, but Tari Eason is out for 2 to 3 weeks with a stress reaction in his leg. That phrasing worries me. I mean, there's no indication here that this is going to be anything other than just they're being precautionary and it's 2 to 3 weeks. But stress reaction is what Cade had. A stress injury is what Drew Holiday had years ago, and they can linger. And on a team that isn't really playing for wins this season, I don't think. Are you concerned at all here with Tari Eason? Is this going to hang around? Does it sort of cause you to? He wasn't a high draft pick anyway, but does it bump him down, and does it bump someone like an Amen Thompson up a little bit?
Yeah, it does bump him down a little bit. With him set to miss multiple weeks, as you mentioned, at minimum. We're not sure if it extends beyond that. That is something that we're going to look to other guys on the roster. Amen Thompson is somebody that has been rising up ADP pretty steadily, with preseason play. I'm not necessarily interested in a Jayshawn Tate or a Reggie Bullock. I wasn't interested in them before. I'm not going to look to them now. I think Dylan Brooks maybe gets a little more love in a points league, category league. No thanks. And maybe we see a little bit more out of a Jock Landale in the pretty thin front court. But otherwise, there's not really a ton of I don't know. There's not really a clear winner here. There's not any big moves to make. I think it does kind of cement Jabari Smith, though, as a really, really high upside player who's now not even going to have to worry about Tari Eason maybe stealing a couple minutes here and there.
And so the final one, which again is not massive in terms of fantasy, but Bojan Bogdanovic, who hasn't really played in the preseason, he's been ruled out for the opening night, I think, with a calf injury. Yeah. So another thing, calves, hamstrings, they can linger a little bit. They can take a couple of weeks. So no indication here that he's going to miss anything more than a game or two, but he was probably penciled in as a starter there. Do you think with him out, Jaden Ivey moves into the starting lineup, or do they bring someone like, I don't know, Marvin Bagley? They've got weird, sort of not talentless, but weird mediocre depth in Detroit. So does him being out, does it benefit anyone? Is there any streaming appeal there for anyone that wasn't drafted?
I don't think necessarily it does. I mean, you talk about the weird depth, like you mentioned. I mean, so I think Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren are probably penciled in your front court. I would have to imagine. With Uncle Bogey out, maybe they play Ausar Thompson at the 3 and give Jaden Ivey some run at the 2 with Cade playing point guard. That's how I would imagine they would do it. If they decide to bring Ivy off the bench, Ausar Thompson maybe at 2, and somebody like an Alec Burks or Joe Harris at 3, not necessarily appealing for either of those guys as well. So no, I think Ausar Thompson gets a bump here, but he's not a streamer. You've already drafted him.
Yeah.
He's been rising up draft boards.
Yeah, I think the only one for him possibly would be maybe Alec Burks if you need some points, just if you're looking for a cheap points boost. But the thing is, I'm almost 100% sure they don't play opening night. They play on that second night, and most teams play that night. So you're probably not going to stream anyone in anyway on that night. Your roster's probably going to be pretty full. So there might be no point on making any moves. So jumping into the Western Conference, starting with the Northwest, much like a few teams we talked about last week, the Denver Nuggets, there's not really a lot to talk about from a fantasy perspective. We know who has value. Strawther has been impressive in the preseason, I thought, more so than Peyton Watson. Watson is someone that I'm relatively high on still. We're not drafting either of these guys, but have either of them sort of maybe moved up in rankings for you, or is there enough, probably along with Christian Brown, is there enough meat on that bone in Denver for them to have any kind of value?
I don't think there's going to be enough meat on the bone, at least right away. I mean, so if we see some injuries, we see some rest, maybe these guys move up a little bit. But essentially, this is the same roster as they had last season, minus Bruce Brown, minus Jeff Green. And on this roster last year, the 5 starters, clearly had value. And then Bruce Brown, primarily off the bench. He had value as their 6th man. And so if we're looking here at this year, I'm very, very high on Christian Brown. I think he takes on that Bruce Brown role and operates as the 6th man. And I don't think there's enough meat left on the bone after that 6th guy to be worth rostering anywhere.
Yeah, agreed. I think Brown is someone just to keep an eye on, just to figure out, give it a week and have a look at if he is playing those Bruce Brown minutes, because deeper leagues, there might be some value there. Moving to the Timberwolves, a team that's probably pushing pretty hard this season, I think, to win. Obviously, the Gobert trade didn't turn out too well for them last year. He wasn't great. Towns was out. So what are your thoughts here on, I've mentioned a couple of guards, Mike Conley and Shake Milton. I love getting Conley late. I know there's basically zero upside with him, but a guy that can get you 14 points, 5.5 assists, 1.1, 1.2 steals, 2 threes, efficient from the free throw line. And to me, they don't really have a lot of point guard depth. I did mention Shake Milton there, and they have Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but I think Conley's going to need to play, and if he's playing 30 minutes a night, then I think he's a great target late.
Yeah, I just am not a big fan of Conley. I think with his age, I don't know if he sticks on this roster all season. Maybe he does. Maybe I'm reading this completely wrong. But, if he's going to play 30 minutes a night, absolutely. Yeah, to your point, a guy that can get you 3 steals, assists late in the draft, and people are underselling him much like I am. So that's totally fine. And I totally get the logic behind it. I'm more interested in a Shake Milton, who averaged 20 points and 7 assists when he started last season, for the Sixers when guys were injured. And he's a guy to me that if he comes in and starts for Minnesota at some point this season, is absolutely going to tear things up for the Timberwolves. So I really like him in deeper leagues. I don't think there's enough there right now to start the season to draft him in a 12-team league. But if you're in a deeper league, man, that's a great late round flyer with a proven track record of playing really well, when inserted into the starting lineup.
Yeah, I like Milton too as someone just to keep an eye on because he flashed some playmaking upside last year, right down the stretch. He in Philly, it took everyone else being out for that to happen. But if he does step into a role at some point, he'd be someone to consider streaming in. Someone else I just wanted to touch on. I was just going through, and this is relevant because in that league I mentioned where I drafted Wembanyama and Anthony Davis and Chet. I ended up going with a punt, points, threes, and free throw percentage or free throw percentage. Yeah, because I wanted Ben Simmons. So I ended up punting free throw percentage, points, and threes. So I took Kyle Anderson with my last pick. And as I said, outside of Conley, they don't really have a point guard as such. But Kyle Anderson can play that role. He'll be coming off the bench, so he's not going to play minutes like he did last year, barring an injury to Karl Anthony Towns again, which fingers crossed that doesn't happen. Do you think he's worth rostering in standard leagues just because of his ability to chip in everywhere?
I'm not necessarily interested in Kyle Anderson in a 12-team league right now. You're right. He can chip in everywhere. And we've seen some solid, last year, especially we've seen some solid fantasy performances from him. But last year it took injuries to Towns. It took missed time from Gobert to really make him relevant. So I'm not going to bank on that when I'm going into my draft. A guy that I think in deeper leagues that I'm more interested in would be Naz Reid, who just signed an extension in the offseason. A guy that can block shots, can hit threes. We saw him have some of the best offensive games of his career last season. So he's a capable scorer when given the opportunity. But for the most part, in 12-team leagues, I'm not taking either. But in deeper leagues, I'm interested in Reid and then Slow-Mo after that.
Okay. Quickly on the Thunder, again, not much to talk about. We know what their rotation looks like. There's not really any value outside of their starters, but I just thought I'd get your thoughts on how good Chet has looked. Both he and Wemby obviously have a lot of hype around them, and they're these freak players and doing things that other players haven't done before. I've been pretty impressed with him. And I think he looks ready to go. I think there was a bit of hesitation coming in with the foot injury from last year. Were they going to manage him? Is he going to miss back-to-backs? Anything? There's been no indication that that's going to happen. He's starting at center. Any concerns here from you, or you think he's good to go and we're okay drafting him in that sort of? I probably went a bit early on him yesterday, but probably in around that 40 range.
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. Like you mentioned, that's where you're going to have to take him in that 40 range. But I really don't think – now, obviously, I think Wemby is going to be the better fantasy option, the better player. But do I think it's miles of difference between the two? I don't. And the amount of picks that you can get between those two guys, it's at least a round and a half to 2 rounds between them. So I think Chet, if you're looking for that archetype player of long and lanky, blocking shots, hitting threes, taking guys off the dribble, I think if you miss on Wemby, either because of where you're drafting or because of how high the pick is, I think Chet is a great alternative and somebody that's going to be a lot of fun on your fantasy team that you can get for a lot cheaper.
On to Portland. So a few questions here, and some of these are more just me, I think, being an outlier or having an outlier opinion. But DeAndre Ayton, and I've spoken with a few analysts about this. He's obviously in a really good position this year. He's on a young team, not really looking to win as such. So he's talked himself up. He's basically got run as the starter. My concern, and people are taking him as high as 40. His ADP is around 50-ish, I think, which I think is okay. Like I don't argue with his ADP, but where my hesitation comes, and I don't have him anywhere, is his attitude on the court and what he was like during his rookie season. And obviously he's older now, but I just remember when Phoenix were not good in the first year he was there. He looked disengaged. He looked like he wasn't trying. Almost as though there's a bit of an entitlement there, and I worry that he's coming into Portland with that opinion, self-opinion that he will be pretty high in the pecking order. He's going to get shots. He's sort of their future. But I mean, if you look at their roster, they've got guys that are going to want to shoot the ball: Scoot Henderson, Anthony Simons, Shaden Sharp, Jeremy Grant, Malcolm Brogdon. They're all guys that can handle the ball, can shoot the ball, can score the ball. Jeremy Grant maybe shouldn't be either, but he will be. Is there any worry here from you that he's going too high, or are you okay drafting him where he's going?
Yeah, I have no interest in him this year. So I'm with you. I worry about the attitude. I think Portland already has a big three or a big four. The difference between them and Phoenix is they're just not going to win any games. As you mentioned, Scoot, Shaden Sharp, Jeremy Grant. These are all guys that they're heavily invested in the future. And Anthony Simons as well. And DeAndre Ayton, sure, he may be a part of their rebuild, but he's going to be at best, I think, third or fourth in that pecking order. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up fifth. So I personally, I like Robert Williams much, much better than DeAndre Ayton this season. In that 40 to 50 or 60 range, there are plenty of other centers that I like more than Ayton. And my personal preference is to just take a guard or a forward in that round and go a little bit later on center rather than take somebody like an Ayton right there.
Yeah, and I think, look, he might prove me wrong. He might prove you wrong, and he might come out and be committed and play hard and have a really good year. And if he does, then that's great. But sure. I need to see it. I need to see it before I'll invest in him. On Robert Williams, he's falling in drafts. He's basically going outside the top 100. People have almost forgotten about him, I think, because he's coming in. Obviously, when he was in Boston, he was seen as a starter who didn't always start in limited minutes, and now he's purely a backup. I don't really see them trying to play him and Ayton alongside each other, at least not very often. So he's seen as a backup, but 22, 23 minutes is more than enough for him to put up top 100 value. So as you said, you're happy to grab him late in drafts?
I'm absolutely happy to grab him late in drafts. We put out a hot takes article for NBC a couple weeks ago, and mine was Time Lord finishes ahead of Ayton in per game fantasy value. And so I think that's well within the range of outcomes for him, especially given his high upside in the blocks category, which is very scarce for fantasy, as you know, and something that Ayton has struggled to consistently post over his career. He's not really a high blocks guy for a big man. So I think if Williams can get some run at the 4 and maybe play alongside Ayton, I think that would give him the chance to get more minutes, maybe in that 25 minutes range. And at that point can easily crack top 50 value. So I'll call it right here, right now, man. Robert Williams is a league winner if you get him outside the top 100.
There you go. Another hot take along with your you with Jordan Poole leading the league in scoring. I'm sure that sticks with me, and there's a chance he's not going to die trying. So he's going to give it his best shot. And just quickly, Malcolm Brogdon. So he came across as part of a few trades, and I think most of us thought that this was more of just a stopover and he would be moved on. It doesn't look like it's going to happen. It looks like he's going to play. He won't be starting. I'm fairly confident of that, given they've got so many young guards that they're invested in. Is there a path to him having any value this season? Someone that you would take in the last round, like a Mike Conley, maybe?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely a path to him being fantasy relevant. As you know, he's not going to, he's not going to wow you necessarily with points, assists, rebounds, steals, but he's going to do enough in, all those categories to be probably worth your time. And what I love about Brogdon is he's always been an efficient shooter throughout his career. So you are going to get that high floor from the percentages. So right now, I currently have him ranked just inside the top 110, in 8 category leagues. So I think if you can get him with one of the last picks in your draft, I think he can certainly pay off and get you some value there.
And I think even if you just look back to last year where he played 26 minutes a night as a backup in Boston, he was the 118th ranked player. So I think 26 minutes is doable.
Sure.
And hopefully less minutes means more games, because he is someone that has struggled through a few injuries in his career. So if he's playing that backup role 25 minutes, you might get 60, 65 games out of him. So, yeah, certainly worth a look. Finally, the Utah Jazz. I think for me, coming into the season a month ago before the preseason kicked off, I was probably of the opinion that Sexton was going to start at point guard, maybe Keontae George, but it looks like it's going to be Taylor Horton-Tucker based on what we've seen. He was pretty good down the stretch last year. He's obviously got some deficiencies and some holes in his game, but are you okay? Are you willing to take a chance on him in the last round? Like, is there more upside with taking him than a Mike Conley, for example?
I think there's probably more upside than a Mike Conley, but Conley has, obviously the much higher floor. I'd love to see what Horton-Tucker could do if he gets the starting job for the whole season. As you mentioned, to close out last season, he played great, as he did at the end of the season before that with the Lakers. Posting some huge, monster numbers in games that really meant nothing. So we'll see what happens this year, but I'll be honest with you, I consider the Utah Jazz rotation fairly fluid, outside of Markkanen and Kessler. I'm really not entirely sure what to expect out of these guys right now.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I think it depends on where they are, say mid-season, or are they pushing for a playoff spot, or have they sort of bottomed out and they're sitting 13th? I think that will impact what their rotation looks like beyond, say, December, because I'd like to think that Keontae George will start at some point this season. But obviously if Horton-Tucker starts and they're winning games and playing well, they'll just roll with that. Chris Dunn, they re-signed or guaranteed his contract or something yesterday, so he is still there. And I mean, of all of them, he's probably the best fantasy player. We saw that last year. He was really good. I don't mind Keontae George late, but I wouldn't be drafting him with a view to him having a significant role, at least for the first month. John Collins, finally, he's sort of seen as a bit of a bounce back candidate by some. He hasn't looked great during the preseason. Do you think he can get back to, he's not going to get back to where he was 3 years ago when he was a top 20, top 30 player, but coming off a season that was pretty bad last year, do you think he can be a top 100, top 80 again this year?
He can certainly be a top 100 guy. And where you're drafting him, I think he will. I think he's going to end up being a steal. As you mentioned, top 20, top 30. This guy, even from his rookie season, was consistently, like a top 50 guy for, multiple years in a row. Just because he was, we've talked about these type of players before. He was a guy that wasn't blowing you away anywhere. But he was consistent enough in multiple categories and wasn't hurting you anywhere. So he was just giving you that solid all around value, and I think he can certainly do that now with the Jazz. I think this will be a great reset for him. Time to kind of bounce back a little bit, and I love getting John Collins.
All right, over to the Pacific Division. The Warriors. Again, a team, we know who they are. We know who their fantasy guys are. Probably the biggest question is Jonathan Kuminga, who's been pretty good in the preseason. But what's his role going to look like when they're playing real basketball? That's the concern. Is there value in grabbing him late in a draft, or are you sort of still a bit worried that he's going to be too far down the pecking order to have any value?
Yeah, I'm worried about that, but I think if he's going to break out, I think this is going to be the year. It seems kind of like the perfect, convergence. Chris Paul, obviously older, injury prone. Will he end up missing time? Jordan Poole's gone, so the roster is thinner. Draymond Green is going to be, going to miss some time to start the season. I think Kuminga, this may be his time. And as impressive as he's looked in the preseason, he's one of those hyper athletic guys that, it doesn't necessarily pan out for fantasy hoops all the time. But he certainly has the athleticism, the motor, the skills to go out there and put up some pretty useful numbers.
Yeah, much like you, I'm not convinced what his role looks like. But on the flip side, he is playing on a team that has a lot of older veterans who are going to miss time. So if you can ride him, sort of ride the ups and downs, there's certainly, I think, going to be periods this year where he is must roster because Chris Paul could miss time, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green. I mean, they're all, you would say, in the twilight or the back end of their career. So the Warriors are going to try their best to manage those minutes. So he is sort of a guy that if you take late, it's pure upside that you're drafting him on. And I wouldn't be convinced that he's going to have more than about 22, 23 minutes on opening night. But I mean, we already know Draymond Green is possibly out for opening night, so we haven't even started, and they're looking that way. So, and just quickly on Chris Paul, his role was a bit uncertain when he went to Golden State. I think we've figured out now he's going to be a starter or at least play starters minutes, even if he's coming off the bench. It'll depend a bit on matchup, but a guy that could get you 8, 9 assists, 1.5 steals. He's pretty efficient, not as efficient as he used to be, but 14, 15 points. His ADP, like a month ago, 6 weeks ago, was probably in the 90s. It's come up a bit. How high are you willing to go for him, knowing what we know now?
I still have my reservations about Chris Paul. I really do. As you mentioned, playing starters minutes perhaps. But how long is he going to hold up? And what are his numbers going to look like playing alongside Steph Curry, playing alongside some of these other guys, how he looks in Steve Kerr's system. I'm fine taking him, outside of maybe the top 90 picks. And I think you can get a lot of value for him there. But I think any higher than that, and I really think you lose all of that value that kind of comes with the baked-in risk for him missing time and maybe just having a severely decreased role. So I'm not very bullish on him right now.
Yeah, I think you need him to be your third or fourth point guard. Like you couldn't have him as someone that you're relying on for nightly production. But as someone who you can, like we know he's playing tonight, let's move him in. It's a favorable matchup, but have other guards that you can slide in if you need to.
Yeah.
On to the Clippers. Now, I did this last week, and it's probably not something we need to talk about as much now, but Rob Covington had played pretty well in the preseason. I think it's fair to say the Clippers misused him last year. He basically was a no-show. I think his role is going to be bigger this year. I thought he might start, but it's sort of now we know that it's probably going to be Terrence Mann that's starting. Is Covington going to play enough to have any value? We know he doesn't need more than about 22, 23 minutes because of what he can do on the defensive end, and he can hit some threes. Is there enough there for him to be a draftable player, or it's more of we just won't draft him, but we'll see what his role looks like?
I think it's the latter. We see a lot of these guys every year that kind of have their value boosted by their defensive numbers. Whether it's him or a DeLon Wright or Matisse Thybulle type of guy. I'm not saying Covington is those other guys, but we see this from him every year, right? He's undervalued, and then he goes off and is getting 2 steals and a block per game, and then everybody drafts and picks him up off the waiver wire. And then he starts to stink again, or he doesn't get minutes, and we drop him. I mean, it's like you can set your watch to this every year. It's the ROCO cycle that we go through every fantasy season, and I have no interest in being a part of that cycle and contributing to the delinquency of fantasy managers. So I'm not interested in him. I'm really not interested in anybody on this Clippers team. I like Kawhi if I can get him at a value at a discount, but everybody else, no interest here from the Clippers.
Yeah, I think we forget how deep they are when they're healthy. They go 10, 11 deep. Looking at their roster here, their depth chart. Outside of their starters, they've got Norm Powell, Mason Plumlee, Robert Covington, Bones Highland, Nicholas Batum, Marcus Morris, Kenyon Martin. Mm-hmm. So that's going 12 deep. So I think you'll find that there's just going to be a lot of guys getting 18 minutes. It's not going to be, other than probably Norm Powell, he probably gets 26, 27 minutes just because of what he does. They're not really a team that I'm interested in from a fantasy perspective either. Onto the Lakers. We know their starters. We know who we're drafting. So outside of Anthony Davis, LeBron James, Austin Reeves, and D'Angelo Russell, Jared Vanderbilt is probably going to be the starter, although I think they have come out and said Taurean Prince might be starting. So is there any value outside of those four? Christian Wood, Taurean Prince, Jared Vanderbilt, Rui Hachimura, Gabe Vincent, are any of them guys that we can draft, or they're going to just be we plug them in when LeBron's injured or when Anthony Davis is injured?
Yeah, I think you plug him in when LeBron is injured. I like Christian Wood. I think he's fine. Obviously, you're going to have D'Lo, you're going to have LeBron, you're going to have Austin Reeves, and you're going to have AD. Those are the four, the big four that you were just talking about. I do think Christian Wood, I like him as a last pick in my draft. We've seen from him wherever he's played that he can give you top 100-ish numbers. It might be kind of ugly. It might not be too pretty to watch, but he can get there for you. So I absolutely like him as that fifth fantasy option for this team. But Taurean Prince, Rui, Rui, great playoff story for him last year, but he's a points and threes guy, and he's really not much of a threes guy, if we're being honest. So he's more of just a points guy. Gabe Vincent, great source of assists, maybe. We'll see what he does outside of Heat culture. But if LeBron or D'Lo get hurt, sure, he's a pickup, but nobody outside of those five that we just talked about.
So over to Phoenix, another team where we really, outside of their big four, there's probably not a lot of fantasy value. But I just thought I'd talk about Yusuf Nurkic. So obviously he's been in Portland for forever. He's been a bit up and down. He's sort of put up really good seasons. He's had some injuries. I would say on the whole he's been pretty underwhelming considering where we draft him and what we know he's capable of. Coming into Phoenix, he's playing on the offensive end. He's playing behind three pure scorers. So I think we can pretty confidently say he's the fourth option on offense. But I can actually see a path to him having better value this season, just playing on a better team. I think that there's no pressure on him. They'll use him as a bit of an offensive hub, I think, because they don't really have a true point guard now. So I think he could get a few assists. I don't know. I just think being in a situation like this might lend itself to him staying healthy and putting together a pretty good season. And you can get him outside of the top 100, even outside of the top 120. Is he someone you're interested in? And am I onto something there? Or do you purely see this as a situation where he's going to lose value and maybe be a last round pick?
Yeah, I think he's totally fine to draft outside the top 100. We've seen, just due to injuries, we've seen him really deteriorate over the last few seasons. So not necessarily somebody that I'm thrilled to take. But once you get outside that top 100, it's all about swinging for the fences. So if you're talking about a center that can get rebounds, an effective passer, can block shots, get you some steals, I think he's totally fine. I think there's going to be plenty of upside for him. And outside the top 100, there aren't too many proven, capable guys like that who have that type of skill set. So, yeah, I think you're totally onto something. I personally, I really do like Drew Eubanks just because he's going undrafted everywhere. In a 12-team league, maybe I'll grab him with my last pick, but certainly in deeper leagues, I think he's a home run.
Yeah, and we've seen him back up. Oddly, these two sort of came together. He was back up to Yusuf Nurkic in Portland for a couple of years. He's now the backup in Phoenix. And we've seen what he could do. Like he had 12-team value when he was playing good minutes when Nurkic was out. So, yeah, definitely someone to consider in deeper leagues. On to Sacramento finally. It does look as though when I typed this up, it looked as though Chris Duarte might start. Kevin Huerter would be the other guy in the discussion there. Do you think because I don't think we're drafting Duarte, even if he starts, I don't really see a world where we need to draft Chris Duarte. But in terms of Kevin Huerter, who was decent last season, had some sneaky value, do you think moving to the bench potentially hurts him, or do you think it could be a positive given that he wouldn't be playing alongside De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis and Keegan Murray? Do you think he could have some good value as a sixth man?
I'm not necessarily interested in anybody in Sacramento outside of Fox and Sabonis. I think Murray, given the right price, is totally fine. But as far as Duarte and Huerter, I think they'll be great for that team as rotational pieces who can spread the floor. But for fantasy purposes, I just don't know that there's going to be enough there playing alongside those other guys to be worth my time.
And Keegan Murray, now was he one of your guys last year?
He was.
Am I right? Yes. So you don't sound as though you're backing that up with a preaching to everyone about him this year. So I think he's going to be better, but his fantasy game was a bit empty last year. Points and threes was sort of all he offered. Will he be where do you see him this year? Is he top 100? Is he last round?
I think he's probably just outside that top 100 in that 100 to maybe 110, 115 range. And come on, King, that hurts, man. You telling me I was preaching to everybody last year? I mean, come on now. I was giving a clearly unbiased, very reasonable, well thought out opinion.
That's all you do. Tyrese Halliburton should just be your profile pick.
I really think so, man. And maybe I'll switch to that here when the season starts. But no, with Keegan, I was way too bullish on him last year. But I've seen the light. I'm a little more reasonable this year, and I think between 100 to, like I said, 110, 115 seems like a more reasonable range of outcomes for him.
All right, so over to the Southwest, starting in Dallas, a couple of guys. Obviously, the bulk of their value is tied up in two players, Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. But there's got to be value outside. Two players isn't enough to soak up all the fantasy value on one team. So Grant Williams is sort of someone that people are taking with a last round pick, but Derek Lively looks like he's going to start. I don't think he necessarily plays starters minutes, so 28 or 30, but in 23, 24 minutes, do you think Lively's worth taking last in a draft?
Yeah, I love Derek Lively. Like we just talked about, getting guys outside the top 100 who can block shots at a high level. He has the upside to get you a block and a half per game, even in 22, 23 minutes. And if you can get that with the last pick in your draft, again, man, that's a home run pick. We don't know what's going to happen. Center has kind of been a black hole for Dallas for a little while, but Lively seems like he's going to be the guy. We saw that defensive upside. Maybe he can be that anchor for them. We saw that in the preseason. And if I can get a guy that can get me 6 or 7 rebounds, 1.5 blocks, 65% shooting from the field with the last pick in the draft, that's amazing.
And then his teammate, another guy that he's going to be coming off the bench, but he certainly flashed some upside, is Jaden Hardy. He will probably need an injury to to move into that must roster category. But what do you think? What do you think they do with him? I mean, they've got some depth there now. They've brought in Seth Curry, Tim Hardaway Jr. I'm not sure he stays in Dallas or how long he stays for. But Hardy, do you think he's going to be primary backup to those guys? Or could he nudge 25, 26 minutes a night, or do you think he's more of a 20-minute a night player?
I don't know, man. I'm not even sure if he gets to 20 minutes a night. He may be in that 16 to 18 minute range. You're right. There's going to be more than just Kyrie and Luka. I think Grant Williams is a guy that I will look at with the last pick in a 12-team draft. Derek Lively, obviously. I really like what I saw from Josh Green to close out last season. I think he's probably sticks with the starters to open the season. And then after that, yeah, maybe Jaden Hardy overtakes some guys. Front court, we got, like a Maxi Kleba, Dwight Powell, Rashawn Holmes. Those guys are going to mix in here and there. Really interested to see what Omax Prosper is going to end up doing. He had a pretty solid preseason as well. But yeah, with THJ, with Seth Curry, I just don't see where the minutes are going to come in for Hardy. I think he's a great scorer. But they have guys off the bench that can hit threes and space the floor. I'm not sure where Hardy really fits into that mix, so I'm not interested.
On to Houston, probably not much to talk about. We touched on them sort of to open the show when we were talking about the injury to Tari Eason. We know their depth. You talked about Dylan Brooks. We're probably not touching him in a category league, but in a points league maybe. So there's probably not anything we didn't cover on Houston there that you think warrants discussion?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. I think we know who the starters are going to be for the most part. We know who has primary value, and there's a lot of wait and see guys in Houston, maybe more so than any other team in the NBA right now.
And then much the same for Memphis. We talked about them. I did pop in here replacement value, and I was referring to Ja Morant and where the value lies for his replacement. But there's now another replacement with Steven Adams done for the year. Luke Kennard was someone that I didn't mind if you just needed threes and points late in a draft, because I thought he would probably start, but it now does look like Zaire Williams is going to start. I still think Kennard is. I mean, if that's all you need, although I probably wouldn't waste a draft pick on him now, I'd just stream him in if you need to. Again, anything in Memphis that we haven't covered?
No, I think that's about it, man.
On to the Pelicans, second last team with Trey Murphy. So he's out for 2 months, something like that. I don't think they put a firm date on his return, but we can expect probably at least 2 months. Herb Jones is a steal specialist. We know he's going to be elite in that category. He gets a bump. I don't think we can argue on that fact that his playing time is going to go up. He was probably on the fringes of standard leagues, maybe top 130, 140. Does he move up to that top 100 range for now, at least until Trey Murphy is back? Do you think he can do – we need him to do something else, and I think the obvious path is – to hit some threes and score a little bit more. Do you think he can do that this year?
I don't know necessarily. I think there's a possibility for sure. But if we're talking about guys in New Orleans that can have a bigger role, maybe take on some more minutes. Yeah, Herb Jones is going to be the easy beneficiary there. To me, he kind of falls in with that group that we talked about earlier, your Matisse Thybulle, your DeLon Wrights of the world, guys whose value is tied in large part to defensive numbers. So we saw his numbers kind of regress in that category last year in the steals category, and his fantasy value tanked as a result. So I'm not excited about Herb Jones. He's a fine pick outside of the top 100 if you're looking for that category and you think he kind of steps up as a scorer. But I'm more interested maybe with my last pick in a Dyson Daniels. I think Dyson Daniels, we saw some big flashes from him last year as a passer, as a rebounder, as a scorer. Those are the type of guys that I'm looking for. And I'm blanking on the name right now, but that guy they picked up from Connecticut, in the draft. I think he
Jordan
may.
Hawkins.
That's it. Yeah,
Yep.
I think he may have a shot to pick up some additional minutes as well. So I like those upside picks more than I like a Herb Jones.
Yeah, I think I'd only be grabbing Jones with your last pick if you need steals. As we said, if that's sort of the category that you just need to fill, you pick him up, you play him for 6 weeks, and then if Murphy comes back and Jones's minutes fall down, you drop him, you move on. And just quickly on Jonas Valanciunas, he's a fantasy-friendly center, so he hits his free throws, he can hit threes, so it doesn't really hurt you in those categories. Solid rebounder, not a high scorer. But I worry that based on what we saw last season when Zion was healthy, Valanciunas was, despite starting, he was only playing 18 minutes a night, some nights 20 minutes. So I think, you can grab him late, but are you concerned here that if Zion stays healthy and once Larry Nance is back, is Valanciunas going to play, whether he's in that starting lineup or not, but he's going to play backup minutes, which would make him possibly not worth picking in a 12-team league?
Yeah, I think right now you draft him in a 12-team league just due to the many injuries that they have right now in New Orleans. But yeah, if Nance comes back and stays, if Zion remains healthy, Valanciunas could be a drop candidate here, within the month maybe. As you mentioned, last season his value took a real big hit. Towards the end of the season, he started to make up for that a little bit. But yeah, if Zion is back and doing what he does best, I don't see Valanciunas, really having a ton of upside.
So we'll round out with the Spurs. Wemby, we've talked about. We're both pretty high on him. His ADP, he's probably still sitting at around 30, I would think, maybe the late 20s. But as I said, I reached as high as 14, which I wouldn't recommend reaching that high to get him. But are we at the point now? There's not many drafts left now. Most people are probably done. But are we at the point where you probably need to take him in the second round if you want to get him?
You're going to have to take him in the second round. If he falls outside of that range, count your lucky stars. But anybody that's playing fantasy basketball, if you drafted earlier, before the preseason started, I think you could have gotten him maybe in the third round. Even then, the hype was pretty high. But man, it's reached a fever pitch now. The guy's jumping out of bounds, behind the back passes, jamming and flexing on Chet Holmgren. Step back threes. It's ridiculous. We have all this on video now. It's getting hyped on Twitter. It's on ESPN. We know what this guy's going to do. We thought he was going to be amazing, and he came out in preseason and showed us, wow, I'm even better than what you guys thought. So absolutely, he will be a second-round pick if you haven't drafted already. And shout out to Mitch Casey. I saw him post on Twitter earlier today that in the right build, hey, I'll take him inside the top 20. And I 100% co-sign that. We were talking earlier, I can't remember if it was before the show or at the beginning. Just redid my rankings, and I have him inside the top 20. Totally fine taking him there.
Yeah, as I said, I took him at 14, which it was really that he really fit my build. So he's probably, that's a bit risky, but I really just needed his blocks, rebounds, maybe 3 assists, good from the free throw line. So, he looks really good. He's starting alongside him is Zach Collins, who is slowly creeping up. His ADP is climbing, and I think in that draft I did last night, I have a feeling he went at about pick 80, which is pretty high. Like you were getting him outside the top 100 2 weeks ago. What are you thinking for him this season? He looks good. They just signed him to an extension very recently in the last few hours, I think. Is it his time finally? He's had a fantasy friendly game for years, but he's been injured a lot. There's no pressure on him really. It's all about Wembanyama. So is he worth taking inside that top 100?
Yeah, I have him ranked inside the top 90 for per game value. I think there really is a lot of upside here. And I think preseason has really helped his case. I think a lot of people might have been worried, hey, Victor Wembanyama's coming in. He may take some of that shine, some of those minutes away from Collins. But I actually see Collins playing more minutes this season. He played, just under, I think, 23 last season. And it was the best season of his career. He had played 25 or 26 for one of his seasons before that. But just didn't put up the numbers that he did in San Antonio last year. He played a good many games last year after being injured for so long. So I think the chemistry that we've seen between him and Wemby in the preseason, I think the Spurs are going to do a lot of that. We're going to see a lot of Collins and Wemby on the court at the same time, and they look great together. Especially if we can see some headband Zach out there, it's going to be magical for fantasy managers.
Yeah, I do like the headband look. Finally, Jeremy Sohan, he's going to start at point guard. Trey Jones will come off the bench. Sohan is probably someone that was being drafted anyway in the last round, second last round, but he's now probably a must roster player, I think, if he's going to start. The Spurs are in a position where they can experiment with him at point guard and not sort of feel that pressure to change things if they're not winning, because they don't really care yet about winning. So I feel like he's going to have this role at least for the first month, 2 months. There's going to be some growing pains and he's got to figure things out. But where do you see him now, like in terms of your rankings? Have you brought him up in your rankings, and where do you have him?
Yeah, I've moved him up in my rankings. That one, let me pull my rankings up here. I think I have him now inside the top 130, if I'm not mistaken. So he's not inside the top 100 for me yet. Like you said, there's still going to be some growing pains. We're still going to need to see what a full season of this looks like. You don't move from power forward to point guard and all of a sudden, everything just works out the way it's supposed to. But I think Pop putting him in that position, obviously he thinks that that's going to be the best position for him and the team to succeed. So he's got to like what he sees there. So I'm excited to see what he can do. Sohan certainly is going to be a guy that, I would like to take, in that 11 or 12th round type of range. And he's got top 100 upside. If he can stick as the point guard, if he can make some moves as a scorer, maybe improve on the efficiency, really show out as a playmaker, I think he's got a clear path to, putting up some solid value.
Yeah, I sort of think of him as a bit of if you think of Ben Simmons when he was proper Ben Simmons, sort of a Ben Simmons light kind of guy. So he's not the natural ball handler like Ben Simmons. So he's not going to be getting double-digit assists every night and that sort of thing. But he'll get you good rebound numbers, solid assists. He's handy on the defensive end, but a little bit more offensive upside, I think, than Ben Simmons. He can hit threes. He's better from the free throw line. He obviously very well documented. He shoots his free throws one-handed, but if you look at the final 3 months of last year, he was at around 77% from the free throw line. So it's not quite average, but it's not going to kill you either. So yeah, look, I'm really targeting him at the back end of my drafts at the moment. Let me exit that out. We are done for today. Another hour talking about fantasy basketball. What better way to spend a Monday morning or a Sunday evening for you? Thanks again for coming on. There'll be shows coming out over the next couple of weeks. We just have to figure out when they're going to come out. But usually they will be on a Tuesday night. We'll be recording. They'll come out on a Wednesday over there. Any final thoughts before I let you go and look after those kids?
Final thoughts. Man, I'm just excited for opening night, man. Tuesday night. We got NBA basketball, man. We've talked about this stuff all off season, which is the greatest time to be a fantasy analyst, to put your takes out there. And then once the season starts, then you actually have to own those takes and realize what an idiot you look like. So, I'm super excited for Lakers and Nuggets and Suns Warriors on Tuesday, man. It's going to be a blast.
Yeah, I think I'm going to miss those. I think they're actually on when I'm on the plane over there. So I'm hoping the plane has Wi-Fi so I can at least check. I don't think I'll be able to stream it on the plane. Their Wi-Fi is usually not that good, but as long as I can check box scores and know what's going on, that'll be good. That will do it for today's show. Remember to check out all of our content over at fbibasketball.com. Access the Discord server there. We've got plenty of player ranks up now. Matt Lawson has released a ton. You can follow this podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, and we would love it if you could give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, catch up.
You just listened to another episode from the Fantasy Basketball International Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us. And for more information about joining our community, please check out our website at fbibasketball.com.